In the dense Pennsylvania fog, Elias Deringer arrived at his ancestral home, Deringer Manor, after a decade confined to Blackwood Asylum. At 32, he had already outlived every Deringer male for 6 generations, a fact the asylum doctors dismissed as coincidence, but the locals called a curse. The carriage driver, clearly terrified of the property, dropped him off with a hasty "God be with you" and vanished into the mist. Deringer Manor, built in 1789 by his great-great-grandfather Isaiah Deringer, was a monument to decay. Its Victorian architecture was peeling, its windows clouded with neglect. Before he could knock, the front door creaked open. Mrs. Winters, the gaunt, 73-year-old housekeeper who had served 3 generations of Deringers, stood silhouetted in the dim entrance hall. "Master Elias," she said in a thin voice, "we've been expecting you." The hall smelled of dust, wood rot, and something sickly sweet. Elias, his prematurely gray hair and a scar on his temple a testament to his time in the asylum, learned that the east wing of the manor remained sealed, as per his late father's instructions. As he ascended the grand staircase, Elias felt the familiar sensation of being watched. He paused before the portrait of his ancestor, Isaiah Deringer, which hung above the fireplace. He could have sworn the portrait had been altered, but Mrs. Winters assured him nothing had been touched. She led him to a spacious bedroom at the end of the second-floor hallway, his mother's old room. "Your father never set foot in here after her passing," she said. Said the air felt wrong. From the window, Elias could see the family cemetery, a hillside dotted with small headstones, and in the distance, the old willow tree where his cousin Thomas had been found hanging in 1842. Mrs. Winters informed him that his father's study remained locked, but the key was in his bedside table, along with personal effects deemed appropriate by the family lawyer, Mr. Hargrove, who would be calling the next day to discuss the inheritance and its conditions. Alone in the room, Elias found the iron key and unlocked the drawer. Inside lay a small, tarnished silver locket and a leather-bound book. He opened the locket to reveal 2 miniature portraits, one of Isaiah Deringer, his stern features captured in fine detail, and the other of a woman with delicate features and sad, dark eyes, Isaiah's wife. The book was Isaiah's personal journal, its pages filled with his elegant but increasingly frantic script. The early entries spoke of his ambition to build a legacy, but the later entries descended into obsession. He wrote of his wife's inability to conceive and his desperate search for a solution, a search that led him to ancient traditions and forgotten rituals. The final, nearly illegible entry spoke of a bargain made, a price paid in blood, and a hunger that could not be sated. A small, folded piece of paper tucked into the back of the journal contained a crudely drawn family tree. It showed Isaiah and his wife at the top, with a single line leading down to a name. Thomas Deringer, born 1790, died 1799. Below Thomas, the line continued, branching out through generations, each name accompanied by a death date, none living past their 30th year. The final name on the tree was his own, Elias Deringer, born 1850. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Elias quickly hid the journal and locket as he heard Mrs. Winters' soft footsteps approaching. She entered without knocking, carrying a tray with a glass of milk. "I thought you might appreciate something to help you sleep," she said, her faded eyes seeming to look right through him. "The first night back in this house is always the most difficult." As she placed the tray on his bedside table, her hand brushed against the drawer where he had hidden the journal. A flicker of something, recognition, perhaps cunning, passed through her eyes before her neutral expression returned. After she left, Elias felt an overwhelming sense of unease. He had a chilling feeling that Mrs. Winters knew more about the house's secrets than she let on, and that he was not a returning master but a lamb being led to slaughter. The house seemed to be waiting, and the air itself felt heavy with a hungry, ancient presence. "Though I am curious, why did you stay all these years after everything that's happened to this family?" The old woman was silent for so long that Elias thought she might have left. When she finally spoke, her voice had dropped to little more than a whisper. "Some houses, Master Elias, don't let you leave once they've claimed you." The door closed with a soft click, leaving Elias alone with the shadows that seemed to pulse in the corners of the room. He moved to the bedside table and opened the drawer, finding a brass key and a leather-bound journal. The journal's cover was worn smooth from handling. The pages yellowed with age. On the first page, written in his father's precise handwriting, were the words, "For my son Elias, may you succeed where I failed. The bloodline must end with you." Elias closed the journal, a chill running down his spine despite the room's stuffiness. Outside, thunder rumbled across the hills, and the first drops of rain began to patter against the window pane. As he unpacked his meager belongings, he couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching him, assessing him like a predator sizing up its prey. In the hallway, the floorboards creaked as if under the weight of footsteps, though Mrs. Winters had long since retired to her quarters in the servants' wing. And from somewhere deep within the walls came a sound like breathing, slow, rhythmic, patient. Elias Deringer had returned home, and the house had been waiting. Morning arrived with reluctance, gray light filtering through the fog that clung to Deringer Manor like a shroud. Elias awoke with a start, his nightshirt damp with sweat despite the room's chill. In his dreams, he had wandered the East Wing, the forbidden wing, where doors opened onto rooms that shouldn't exist, and corridors stretched into impossible geometries. At the end of one such corridor, he had found a nursery where every cradle contained a small, withered corpse, each bearing the unmistakable Deringer features: the high forehead, the sharp chin, the deep-set eyes that seemed to follow him even in death. He sat up, pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes until stars burst behind his eyelids. The doctors at Blackwood had warned him that nightmares might persist even after his release, a side effect of the treatments and the gradual reduction of his medications. But these dreams felt different, more vivid, more purposeful. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Breakfast is served in the morning room, sir," Mrs. Winters called through the door. "Mr. Argrove has sent word that he'll arrive at 11:00. "Thank you," Elias replied, his voice rough with sleep. "I'll be down shortly." After dressing in one of his father's old suits found hanging in the wardrobe, preserved as if waiting for his return, Elias made his way downstairs. The morning light did little to soften the manor's oppressive atmosphere. If anything, it highlighted the decay. Water stains on the ceiling, cracks in the plaster, the faded patterns of once vibrant wallpaper. The morning room was located at the back of the house, its large windows overlooking what had once been a formal garden, but was now an overgrown tangle of weeds and brambles. A small table had been set with a modest breakfast of toast, eggs, and coffee. As Elias took his seat, he noticed a folded newspaper beside his plate. The Millbrook Gazette, dated the previous day, featured a small article on the front page: "Last of the Deringers returns." Elias Deringer, sole surviving heir to the infamous Deringer fortune, has been released from Blackwood Asylum after a decade of confinement. Sources close to the family lawyer confirm that Deringer has returned to claim his inheritance despite local superstitions surrounding the property and its troubled history. Readers will recall the tragic circumstances of the Deringer family, whose male heirs have met with untimely and often violent ends for generations. Elias set the paper aside, his appetite diminishing. He had hoped for some measure of privacy, but in a town as small as Millbrook, such hopes were foolish. No doubt his return was already the subject of gossip in every parlor and tavern. As he sipped his coffee, bitter and oversteeped, his gaze was drawn to a small door at the far end of the room, partially hidden behind a heavy curtain. He didn't recall it from his childhood, but then again, certain parts of the house had been strictly off-limits to him as a boy. Curiosity piqued. He rose from the table and crossed to the door. It was smaller than standard, perhaps 5 feet tall, with no visible handle or keyhole. The wood was darker than the surrounding paneling, almost black and carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. "That door doesn't open, sir." Elias turned to find Mrs. Winters standing in the doorway, a silver coffee pot in her gnarled hands. Her expression was carefully neutral, but her knuckles were white where they gripped the pot's handle. "It's not a door at all," she continued, moving to refill his cup. "Just a decorative panel, part of the original construction." "Strange place for decoration," Elias observed, running his fingers along the carvings. They felt warm to the touch, almost feverish, despite the room's chill. "The Deringers have always had unusual tastes in architecture," Mrs. Winters replied. Her eyes never left the door as she spoke. "Your great-great-grandfather was said to have designed the house himself, incorporating elements from his travels abroad." "To where?" "Places best not discussed at breakfast, sir." She set the coffee pot down with a finality that suggested the conversation was over. "Mr. Harrove will be here soon. Perhaps you'd like to review your father's journal before he arrives." Elias nodded, recognizing the deflection but choosing not to press. He returned to his seat, though he could still feel the warmth of the carvings lingering on his fingertips. After breakfast, he retreated to his father's study, using the brass key from the bedside drawer to unlock the heavy oak door. The room beyond was exactly as he remembered it from childhood. Walls lined with bookshelves, a massive desk positioned before the window, leather chairs worn smooth from use. The air smelled of pipe tobacco and old paper with undertones of the same sweet rot scent that permeated the rest of the house. Elias settled into his father's chair, the leather creaking beneath his weight, and opened the journal he'd found the night before. His father's handwriting filled page after page, neat and precise at first, then increasingly erratic as the entries progressed. Most detailed mundane business matters, crop yields from tenant farms, investments in railroad stocks, disputes with neighboring landowners. But interspersed among these were stranger entries, often written in a different ink, sometimes in what appeared to be code or a foreign language. One entry dated 3 months before Elias' commitment to Blackwood caught his eye. He spoke of the figures again today, claims they stand at the foot of his bed each night whispering. Dr. Morris suggests increased doses of laudanum, but I fear it only dulls his awareness without stopping what's happening. The pattern repeats itself just as it did with Thomas, with my father, with all of them. The blood calls to blood. I've consulted the book again, but the pages relevant to our situation remain indecipherable. Perhaps that's for the best. Some knowledge is too dangerous, even in pursuit of breaking the cycle. The east wing grows colder despite the summer heat. Something is gathering strength there. Waiting. I've sealed off the nursery completely. No one is to enter under any circumstances. Elias frowned, trying to recall the figures his father had mentioned. His memories of the time before Blackwood were fragmented at best. Flashes of terror, arguments overheard through doors. His father's face contorted with a mixture of fear and resignation. The asylum doctors had attributed his condition to hereditary madness, pointing to the Deringer history of mental instability as evidence. But his father's journal suggested something else, something his father had understood or at least suspected. A knock at the study door interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Hargrove has arrived, sir," Mrs. Winters announced. "He's waiting in the drawing room." Elias closed the journal and tucked it into his jacket pocket. "Thank you, Mrs. Winters." "I'll see him now." The drawing room, like much of the house, had seen better days. Once elegant furniture was now faded and worn, the grand piano in the corner yellowed with age and neglect. Tall windows looked out over the front drive where a sleek black carriage waited. Its driver huddled against the persistent drizzle. Silas Harrove stood by the fireplace, warming his hands over flames that did little to dispel the room's dampness. At 65, he was a small, precise man with wire-rimmed spectacles and a neatly trimmed white beard. The Harrove family had served as lawyers to the Deringers for 4 generations, almost as if bound by the same curse, though their fates had been considerably less tragic. Elias Hargrove greeted him, extending a hand. "It's good to see you looking so improved." "Improved compared to what, Mr. Harrove?" Elias asked, accepting the handshake. "The raving lunatic you helped commit to Blackwood." Harrove had the decency to look uncomfortable. "That was your father's decision, not mine. I merely facilitated the legal aspects." Of course, Elias gestured to a pair of armchairs. "Shall we discuss my inheritance? I understand there are conditions." They sat, and Harrove produced a leather portfolio from his briefcase. "Your father was very specific about the terms of his will." He began extracting several documents. "The Deringer estate, including the manor surrounding lands, investments, and accounts, passes to you as the sole heir. However, there are stipulations." He handed Elias a document bearing his father's familiar signature. "First, you must reside at Deringer Manor for a minimum of 1 year before gaining full control of the assets. Second, you are forbidden from selling or otherwise disposing of the property during your lifetime. Third, and most importantly, you must not marry or produce children." Elias looked up sharply. He wanted the Deringer line to end with me. "Yes," Hargrove confirmed, his expression grave. "Your father was most insistent on that point. Should you father a child, the entire estate will be placed in trust for charitable purposes, and you will receive only a modest stipend for the remainder of your life." "Did he explain why?" Harrove hesitated, adjusting. His spectacles. "Your father believed the Deringer bloodline was tainted in some way. He spoke of a curse, though I attributed such talk to grief in advancing age. He had, after all, lost his wife, his brother, and effectively his son within the span of a few years. And you never questioned why so many Deringers met tragic ends? Elias pressed. Never wondered if there might be truth to the local superstitions. I am a man of law, not superstition, Hargrove replied stiffly. Though I will admit that the statistical improbability of so many accidents and illnesses befalling one family is noteworthy. Indeed, thunder rumbled overhead and the lights flickered momentarily. From somewhere deep within the house came a sound like wood splintering, followed by a heavy thud. "What was that?" Harrove asked, half rising from his chair. "Old houses make noises," Elias replied calmly. Though his heart had begun to race, especially in storms, Harrove settled back, clearly uncomfortable. "There is one more matter," he said, producing a small brass key from his waistcoat pocket. "Your father entrusted this to me with instructions that it be given to you upon your return. It opens a safe in the library behind the portrait of Elias Deringer." Elias accepted the key, noting that it was similar to the one that had opened his father's study. "Did he say what's inside?" "Only that it contains information vital to understanding your family's situation." Hargrove closed his portfolio with a snap. "I've fulfilled my obligations, Elias. The rest is up to you. But I would caution you. Your father was not a superstitious man by nature. If he believed there was danger in the Deringer bloodline continuing, perhaps there was reason for his concern." After Harrove's departure, Elias made his way to the library, a cavernous room lined with bookshelves that reached to the ceiling. Dust motes danced in the shafts of gray light that penetrated the tall windows, and the air smelled of mildew and leather bindings. The portrait of Elias Deringer hung above the marble fireplace, dominating the room with its imposing presence. Unlike the painting in the entrance hall, this one showed Elias alone, seated in what appeared to be this very library. His expression was severe, almost challenging, his eyes seeming to follow Elias as he approached. Carefully, Elias lifted the heavy frame away from the wall, revealing a small walled safe embedded in the plaster. The brass key fit perfectly, turning with a soft click. Inside, he found a single item, a leather-bound book, its cover unmarked, except for a strange symbol embossed in gold. A circle containing an intricate pattern of lines that seemed to form a stylized tree or perhaps a web. As Elias withdrew the book, a folded piece of paper fell from between its pages. His father's handwriting was instantly recognizable. "Elias, if you are reading this, then I have failed to end our family's curse, and the burden now falls to you. This book came into Elias Deringer's possession in 1787 during his travels in Eastern Europe. It contains knowledge that should have remained buried. Knowledge he used to secure our family's fortune and unwittingly seal our doom. Do not read it in the house. Do not speak of its contents to anyone. And above all, do not attempt to use what you learned from it. The price is too high. The East Wing holds the physical manifestation of our sin. It must remain sealed. Should the barriers fail, burn the house to the ground and salt the earth where it stood. I am sorry for what I did to you, son. I thought I was protecting you, but I was only delaying the inevitable. The blood calls to blood, and the debt must be paid." Your father, Elias, stared at the letter, a cold weight settling in his stomach. Outside, the storm intensified, rain lashing against the windows like desperate fingers seeking entry. And from the direction of the east wing, the sealed wing, came the unmistakable sound of a child's laughter. High and clear and utterly impossible. The book felt unnaturally warm in his hands, almost alive. As he tucked it into his jacket alongside his father's journal, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that he had just set something in motion, something that had been waiting for his return all these years. In the portrait above the fireplace, Elias Deringer's painted eyes seemed to gleam with satisfaction. The storm showed no signs of abating as evening approached, transforming the grounds of Deringer Manor into a sodden wasteland. From his position at the library window, Elias watched lightning fork across the sky, briefly illuminating the family cemetery on the hillside. For a moment, just a moment, he thought he saw figures moving among the headstones, their forms indistinct in the downpour. The book from the safe lay on the desk behind him, still unopened. He had spent the afternoon poring over his father's journal instead, searching for clues about the curse that had plagued the Deringer line. The entries grew increasingly erratic in the months leading up to Elias' commitment to Blackwood, filled with references to the bargain, the debt, and the hunger in the walls. His father had been convinced that the East Wing was the epicenter of whatever malevolence haunted their family, that something was growing stronger there, feeding on the Deringer bloodline. A soft knock at the library door pulled Elias from his thoughts. "Dinner is served, sir." Mrs. Winters announced, her thin frame silhouetted against the hallway light, though I'm afraid it's a simple affair. The storm has prevented the delivery of fresh provisions from town. That's fine, Mrs. Winters, Elias replied, gathering the journal and the mysterious book. I'm not particularly hungry. The old woman's gaze lingered on the items in his hands, her expression unreadable. Finding answers. Are you, sir? Perhaps Elias said carefully. Did you know my father well, Mrs. Winters? I served him for 30 years, she replied. I watched him change from a hopeful young man to what he became at the end. And what was that exactly? Mrs. Winters was silent for a long moment, her rheumy eyes fixed on the portrait of Elias Deringer. Afraid, she finally said, not for himself, but for you. He believed he could end it, you see. Break the pattern, that's why he sent you away, to protect me. To protect the world from what you might become. She turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. The East Wing has been sealed for a reason, Master Elias. Some doors are meant to stay closed. After a sparse dinner of canned soup and stale bread, Elias retired to his room with the book and journal. Rain continued to batter the windows, and wind howled through the eaves like a living thing in pain. The electricity flickered intermittently, threatening to plunge the manor into darkness at any moment. Sitting at the writing desk, Elias finally opened the mysterious book from the safe. Its pages were made of a material he couldn't identify, not quite paper, not quite parchment, with a texture that reminded him uncomfortably of skin. The text was written in multiple languages, some recognizable, Latin, Greek, Hebrew, others completely foreign to him. Interspersed among the text were diagrams and illustrations of disturbing anatomical precision, human figures with organs exposed, strange symbols carved into flesh, rituals involving blood and bone. One section marked with the same tree-like symbol that adorned the cover had been partially translated into English in the margins. The handwriting was cramped and hurried, nothing like Elias Deringer's confident script from the portraits. Blood of the bloodline freely given opens the way. What passes through cannot be undone. The exchange is permanent, prosperity for progeny. The firstborn of each generation serves as vessel and sustenance until the debt is paid in full. Elias frowned, trying to make sense of the cryptic notes. They suggested some kind of bargain or ritual, one involving blood sacrifice and something passing between worlds. Had Elias Deringer, the family patriarch, performed such a ritual to secure the family's fortune? And if so, what exactly had he invited into their bloodline? A sudden crash from the hallway startled him from his thoughts. Setting the book aside, Elias moved cautiously to the door and opened it a crack. The corridor beyond was dark, the electricity having finally succumbed to the storm. In the dim light from his room, he could make out a fallen painting on the floor, its frame shattered. As he bent to examine it, he realized it was a family portrait, one he didn't recall seeing before. It showed a man and woman with a young boy of perhaps 5 or 6. The man's face had been scratched out with such violence that the canvas was torn, but the woman and child were untouched. The boy bore a striking resemblance to Elias himself at that age, with the same solemn expression and deep-set eyes. That's not possible, he murmured, studying the painting more closely. The woman wore clothing from the mid-1800s, placing the portrait at least 50 years before his birth, yet the resemblance was uncanny, as if he were looking at himself across time. A soft sound drew his attention further down the hallway toward the east wing. It was a gentle scraping like fingernails against wood. Elias straightened, straining to see through the darkness. At the far end of the corridor, where it turned toward the sealed wing, he caught a glimpse of movement, a small, pale shape disappearing around the corner. Against his better judgment, Elias followed, guided by occasional flashes of lightning through the windows. The air grew noticeably colder as he approached the junction, where the main hallway met the corridor leading to the east wing. Here, a heavy oak door barred the way, secured with multiple locks and what appeared to be newer additions, steel reinforcing plates and a modern deadbolt. The scraping sound came again, this time from Directal. Why behind the door? Then a voice high and clear, unmistakably a child's. Father, is that you? Father, I'm cold. Please let me in. Elias froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. The voice was eerily familiar, though he couldn't place why. Who's there? He called, his own voice barely above a whisper. Silence stretched for several seconds, broken only by the storm's fury outside. Then you know who I am, Father. You made me. Let me in. I'm so cold. A flash of lightning illuminated the corridor. And in that instant, Elias saw something impossible. Fingers, small childlike fingers, emerging from beneath the door, reaching toward him across the floor. They were unnaturally pale, almost translucent with blackened nails that scraped against the wooden floorboards. Elias stumbled backward, nearly falling in his haste to retreat. The fingers continued to reach, stretching impossibly far from under the door, grasping at air. "Father, please," the voice called, now tinged with desperation. "The others hurt me. They're always hurting me. Only you can make them stop." Another flash of lightning, and the fingers were gone. The voice fell silent. But as Elias turned to flee back to the safety of his room, he caught sight of wet footprints on the floor, small like a child's, leading not away from the east wing door, but toward it, as if something had entered rather than exited. Back in his room, Elias double-locked his door and pushed a heavy dresser against it for good measure. His hands shook as he poured himself a generous measure of brandy from a decanter on the writing desk. The encounter had left him chilled to the bone, his mind racing with implications he didn't want to face. The book lay open where he'd left it. Its pages now turned to a different section, when he was certain he hadn't been reading. This page featured an illustration of a ritual circle at the center of which stood a man cutting his palm over what appeared to be a cradle. Around the circle, shadowy figures reached inward with elongated limbs. The accompanying text was in Latin, but one phrase had been underlined and translated: "Blood calls to blood across the veil." Elias slammed the book shut, his breathing ragged. He needed answers, concrete answers, not cryptic warnings and supernatural encounters that could be attributed to an overactive imagination or the lingering effects of asylum medications. Taking a steadying breath, he retrieved his father's journal and began to read more carefully, focusing on entries from the months immediately preceding his commitment to Blackwood. One passage, dated just 2 weeks before Elias had been taken away, stood out. He found his way into the East Wing yesterday, despite the locks, claiming he was following the other children. When questioned, he described with perfect clarity the nursery that has been sealed for over a century, down to the mobile above the cradle, a detail recorded in no family history, known only to those who have seen it with their own eyes. He spoke of the hungry ones who live in the walls and of a baby that cries without ceasing. Most disturbing, he referred to Isaiah as father and claimed to remember when the house was built. Dr. Morris suggests these are fabrications born of an unstable mind, perhaps influenced by household gossip. But I know better. The blood is awakening in him just as it did in me and my father and all of us. The difference is that E seems to welcome it. I've consulted the book again. There may be a way to sever his connection, to spare him from what awaits the Deringer heirs. It will require sacrifice, but I'm prepared to pay that price. Better that my son hate me for committing him than suffer the fate that awaits him here. Elias set the journal down, a cold realization dawning. His father hadn't committed him out of cruelty or embarrassment. He'd been trying to protect him from whatever lurked in the East Wing, whatever had been claiming Deringer heirs for generations. And now, by returning to the manor, Elias had placed himself directly in its path. A sudden gust of wind extinguished the lamp on his bedside table, plunging the room into darkness, save for the occasional flash of lightning. In that darkness, Elias became acutely aware of sounds he had been subconsciously ignoring. The subtle shifting of the house around him like a body settling, the whisper of movement within the walls, the soft, rhythmic tapping that might have been rain against the window or fingers against wood. And beneath it all, almost too faint to perceive, the sound of a child humming a lullaby. Elias remained motionless, scarcely breathing as the humming grew gradually louder. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, from the walls, the floor, the very air itself. The storm was raging when Elias Deringer saw them, child-sized silhouettes with elongated limbs standing in each corner of his room, their features shifting like smoke. Lightning revealed their eyes, which reflect. The light like those of nocturnal animals. When the thunder faded, they were gone, but a haunting melody remained, a child's voice singing, "Hush now, father dear, the hungry ones are near. They'll take your eyes and take your breath and rock you gently unto death." With trembling hands, Elias turned back to his father's journal, desperately seeking answers. The final entry, written the day before Elias was committed to an asylum, was a cryptic warning. "It's too late for me, but not for him. The hunger has found me instead. The book will show him the way. God forgive me for what I've done to my son and for what I failed to undo, my father's sin." Elias realized the family curse was still active, and now it had set its sights on him. As if summoned by his resolve to uncover the secrets of the manor's sealed East Wing, An ornate iron key materialized on the desk beside the journal. Before he could react, a crash from downstairs and Mrs. Winter's startled cry sent him racing from the room. He found the elderly housekeeper in the entrance hall, standing before the portrait of his ancestor, Elias Deringer, seemingly in conversation with it. "They're restless tonight," she said, her voice oddly flat, her eyes like polished glass. "The children, they've been waiting for you." She revealed the terrifying truth of the Deringer bargain. Each generation, one child was meant to be a vessel for a powerful entity known as the Hunger. But Isaiah didn't understand what he'd summoned. It wasn't satisfied with one and wanted all of them. Mrs. Winters, a servant to the house and its secrets for 50 years, explained that Isaiah still spoke from the walls, and that Elias was the intended final vessel. A falling tree struck the house, knocking Mrs. Winters over and plunging the hall into darkness. When Elias relit his lamp, she was gone. He followed the sound of shuffling feet to the kitchen, where the back door stood open to the storm. He watched in horror as Mrs. Winters walked with unnatural steadiness toward the family cemetery, where small, child-sized figures flowed among the headstones to surround her. The kitchen door slammed shut with supernatural force, throwing Elias backward and shattering his lamp. Fire bloomed instantly, feeding on the spilled oil. As Elias scrambled to find water, he froze. A child stood before him, a boy with Deringer features, translucent skin, and solid black eyes. "Hello, Father," he said, his voice the same one Elias had heard from the East Wing. "I've been waiting." The boy explained he was a piece of all the Deringer children sacrificed to the Hunger created by Isaiah's bargain. Smiling to reveal teeth too sharp and numerous, he declared, "Now we're hungry." More figures appeared as the boy's own form distorted, limbs elongating into claws. Elias fled the burning kitchen, pursued by the patter of small feet and high, hungry laughter, remembering his father's words, "Burn the house to the ground." And realizing he needed the book for answers, he raced back to his room. He grabbed the book and journal, only to find his path blocked by the monstrously transformed child. "You can't leave, Father," it rasped. "None of us can leave." It explained Isaiah's bargain for wealth and power, paid for with the blood of his descendants. "We're all here," it hissed. "In the walls, in the floors, and now you'll join us." The creature moved with impossible speed, trapping Elias in its cold, strong grip. As smoke filled the room, it whispered in his ear, "The answers are in the East Wing, where it all began, where it will end." It released him suddenly and vanished. The iron key now lay on the floor at his feet, gleaming in the lightning flashes. Trapped by the raging fire, with the path to the East Wing his only viable option, Elias was left with a horrifying choice. Elias snatched up the key, book, and journal, then turned to the window. Using a chair from the writing desk, he smashed the glass and cleared the frame of jagged shards. The storm raged outside, rain and wind immediately soaking the curtains and floor. He hesitated, looking back at the smoke-filled room. Part of him, a growing part, wanted to stay, to let the fire take him and end the Deringer line once and for all. But another part, the part that had survived 10 years in Blackwood Asylum, refused to surrender without understanding what he was surrendering to. Taking a deep breath, Elias climbed through the window onto the narrow ledge beyond. The drop was substantial, but a trellis of ancient ivy offered a potential route to the ground. As he began his precarious descent, he glanced up at the East Wing, the sealed section of the house that had remained forbidden for generations. A light burned in one of its windows. A warm, inviting glow that stood in stark contrast to the storm and the spreading fire. And silhouetted against that light was a figure, a woman in old-fashioned dress, her hand pressed longingly against the glass. For an instant, their eyes met across the gulf of rain and darkness. Then lightning struck nearby, temporarily blinding Elias. When his vision cleared, the figure was gone and the window was dark once more. The ivy trellis gave way under his weight when he was still 10 ft from the ground. Elias fell hard, the impact driving the breath from his lungs and sending pain shooting through his ankle. The book and journal tumbled from his grasp, landing in the mud nearby. As he lay there struggling to breathe, a voice carried to him on the wind, Mrs. Winters, calling his name from the direction of the cemetery. Her tone was wrong, though too eager, too hungry. Gathering the book and journal, Elias forced himself to his feet, wincing at the pain in his injured ankle. The manor was now fully engulfed in flames, fire pouring from windows and climbing toward the roof. The heat was intense, even from where he stood, the roar of the inferno competing with the storm's fury. but the east wing remained untouched by the flames, as if protected by some invisible barrier. The iron key felt heavy in Elias' pocket, pulling him toward that forbidden section of the house like a lodestone. Lightning illuminated the scene again, and in that flash, Elias saw them. Dozens of figures standing at the edge of the woods surrounding the property. Children of all ages, all with Deringer features, all watching him with black, hungry eyes. Among them stood Mrs. Winters, her nightgown soaked with rain and something darker, her eyes as black and empty as those of the children surrounding her. "Come home, Master Elias." Her voice carried on the wind, though her lips didn't move. "Come home to us." The figures began to advance slowly, inexorably, moving as one toward him. Clutching the book and journal tightly, Elias turned and limped toward the only part of Deringer Manor that remained untouched by the flames, the east wing where it had all begun, and where, one way or another, it would end. The east wing's entrance was hidden behind a tangle of overgrown shrubbery that had clearly been left untended for decades. Unlike the grand facade of the main house, this section was built of darker stone with narrow windows set deep into the walls like suspicious eyes. A small door, almost invisible beneath a curtain of ivy, appeared to be the only way in. Elias glanced back at the burning manor, flames now engulfing the roof and sending sparks spiraling into the storm-lashed sky. The figures from the woods had reached the garden, their progress slow but relentless, moving with the inevitable patience of those who know their prey has nowhere to run. The iron key felt unnaturally cold in Elias' hand as he approached the east wing door. It fit the ancient lock perfectly, turning with surprising ease despite decades of disuse. The door swung inward on silent hinges, revealing darkness beyond. Elias hesitated at the threshold. Every instinct warned against entering, against stepping willingly into what was clearly a trap. But the alternatives, facing the burning manor or the advancing horde of hungry children, were equally fatal. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside, the door swinging shut behind him with a soft click that sounded horribly final. The interior of the east wing was nothing like Elias had expected. While the main house had been decaying, this section appeared perfectly preserved, as if time had stopped here a century ago. Oil lamps burned in wall sconces, casting warm light over pristine wallpaper and polished wood floors. The air smelled of beeswax and lavender with no hint of the smoke that should have been seeping in from the burning structure mere yards away. Elias moved cautiously down the corridor, his injured ankle throbbing with each step. The walls were lined with portraits, all Deringers judging by their features, though many were unfamiliar to him. Children predominated, solemn-faced boys and girls in clothing from various eras, all with the same deep-set eyes and high foreheads. None appeared older than 12. At the end of the corridor stood a single door, white with gold trim adorned with a hand-painted mural of a tree whose branches formed a complex pattern similar to the symbol on the book's cover. The key left for him opened a door to the east wing, revealing not a sealed-off section of the manor, but a nursery straight from the previous century. In the center, a large, empty cradle sat beneath an elaborate mobile of carved children holding hands, rotating slowly without a breeze. The haunting lullaby Elias had heard came from an ornate music box on a dresser. Its lid was open, showing a miniature scene of a man, a perfect replica of Elias Deringer cutting his palm over a cradle as shadowy figures watched from the corners. But it was the far wall that froze his blood. It was covered floor to ceiling with hundreds of names and dates written in what appeared to be dried blood. All were Deringers, all children, none having lived since their 12th year. At the very bottom, still glistening wetly, was a final entry, Elias Deringer 1850. The date of death remained incomplete. "It's been waiting for you to complete the pattern." A woman stood by the cradle, the same one he'd glimpsed in the window. She introduced herself as Elias Deringer, Isaiah's wife. She explained that death in the house was not an end, but a transformation. Every Deringer child born since Isaiah's bargain had been claimed by the hunger, an entity he had summoned from a dark grimoire to grant him an heir. The ritual promised an unbroken, prosperous lineage in exchange for a tribute. One child from each generation was to be given wholly to the entity. But the ancient, cunning being was not satisfied. It granted them a son, but its hunger grew, wanting all the Deringer children. This influence became known as the Deringer madness. The children's essences were trapped, kept suspended between life and death, and puppeted by the hunger that now permeated the house. Elias confirmed that Elias' father had discovered the truth and sent him away, hoping to end the bloodline and starve the entity. But it had lured Elias back. As the last of his line, he was the final vessel. The entity, grown strong on the essence of generations, intended to claim him and finally break free of the manor to spread its insatiable hunger across the world. Elias demanded to know how to stop it. Elias explained there was a way, but the price was staggering. The ritual could be undone where it began, in the nursery, but it required the willing sacrifice of a Deringer, not to feed the hunger, but to close the door Isaiah had opened. The sacrifice wasn't just death, but complete erasure. Elias would never have existed. The entire Deringer line would be wiped from history as if it had never been. Isaiah would have died childless, his name and legacy forgotten. Faced with letting the entity loose upon the world, Elias made his choice. Elias produced the final, torn-out pages of the ritual and a silver dagger. As the puppeted fragments of Deringer children and adults broke into the east wing, their hungry, childish giggles echoing through the halls, Elias went to hold them off. "I am what remains of the woman who has waited over a century for someone strong enough to end what Isaiah began," she told him, before closing the nursery door behind her. Elias began the ritual. Using the dagger, he cut his palm and drew a circle on the floor with his own blood. Outside, chaos erupted as Elias's powerful chanting clashed with the inhuman shrieks of the hungry ones. Just as he began the final invocation, the nursery door burst open. A monstrously twisted version of Mrs. Winters stood there, her body elongated and bent at impossible angles, backed by the similarly distorted forms of the children, their black eyes gleaming. "Stop him!" shrieked a voice from within Mrs. Winters' ruined form. The creatures surged forward but were unable to cross the blood circle. A fading, translucent Elias appeared behind them, urging him, "Finish it, Elias." Raising the dagger, Elias spoke the final words of the ritual, words of unmaking and erasure. As he did, reality itself began to warp and shimmer. The creatures howled in fury as their forms dissolved like smoke. Mrs. Winters' body collapsed, black ichor pouring from her eyes and mouth. Elias plunged the silver blade into his own heart, sealing the sacrifice and closing the door between worlds forever. The children melted away one by one, their hungry eyes the last part to fade. "Now, Elias," Elias cried, her own form barely visible. "Complete the sacrifice?" Elias positioned the dagger over his heart, hands steady despite the enormity of what he was about to do. In that moment, a strange peace settled over him. The Deringer curse would end with him, not through his death, but through his complete unmaking. It was a price he was willing to pay to end the suffering of generations. "I, Elias Deringer, last of my line, gave myself willingly to close what was opened," he declared, his voice strong and clear. "Let the hunger return to its own realm. Let the door be sealed for all time. Let the Deringer name be unmade, our sins undone, our suffering erased." With those words, he plunged the dagger into his heart. There was no pain, just as Eleanor had promised, only a spreading warmth and a sensation of falling. The nursery dissolved around him, replaced by swirling darkness shot through with threads of light. Faces flashed before him. His father stern but sad, his mother whom he barely remembered, cousins and uncles and ancestors he had never known but whose blood he shared. And as consciousness faded, Elias Deringer felt something he had not experienced since childhood. Peace. Complete and absolute peace. The Deringer curse was broken. The hunger was banished. And history itself began to rewrite, erasing the name Deringer from its pages as if it had never been. Professor James Harrove adjusted his spectacles as he examined the curious artifact on his desk. A silver dagger with a bone handle carved with symbols that matched no known historical culture. It had been discovered during the excavation of a previously unknown burial site in rural Pennsylvania, dated approximately to the late 18th century. "Fascinating," he murmured, making another note in his journal. The metallurgical analysis suggests European origin, yet the symbolism appears to incorporate elements from Eastern European folk magic and Native American iconography. A true anomaly. The small office at Emskatonic University's Department of Anthropology was cluttered with similar oddities, artifacts that defied easy categorization or explanation. James had built his academic reputation on studying such objects, on finding the threads that connected them to known historical contexts. But this dagger was proving particularly challenging. A knock at his office door interrupted his contemplation. "Come in," he called carefully, setting the dagger aside. His research assistant, Sarah Chen, entered with a stack of papers and a concerned expression. "Professor, I found something strange about the Pennsylvania site," she said without preamble. "The property records don't make sense." James raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "According to county records, the land where we found the burial site was purchased in 1787 by a man named Elias Deringer," Sarah explained, spreading several documents on the desk. "He began construction on a large manor house, but apparently died before its completion. The property was abandoned and eventually reclaimed by the county for unpaid taxes. That seems straightforward enough," James noted. "Tragic but not unusual for the time period." "That's just it," Sarah insisted. "I can find no other records of this Elias Deringer. No birth certificate, no marriage license, no death certificate. It's as if he appeared out of nowhere, purchased the land, and then vanished from history." James frowned, intrigued despite himself. Historical gaps were not uncommon, particularly from that era, but complete absence was unusual. What about the burial site itself? "Any indication of who might have been interred there?" Sarah shook her head. "That's another oddity. The grave contained no human remains, just the dagger placed at the center of what appears to have been a ritual circle. The soil analysis showed traces of human blood, but no body was ever present. A cenote, perhaps," James suggested, "a memorial grave without a body." "Maybe," Sarah conceded, "but there's something else." She hesitated, seeming almost embarrassed. "The locals have stories about that land. They say it's cursed, that strange things happen there, especially during storms. Children claim to see other children playing among the ruins, though they vanish when approached. And everyone agrees that the area feels wrong somehow, cold even on the hottest days." James smiled indulgently. "Local superstitions often attach themselves to archaeological sites, particularly those associated with unexplained deaths or abandoned properties. Folk memories can persist for generations," he said, "especially when reinforced by suggestive landscapes or unusual historical circumstances." "I know," Sarah agreed. "But I visited the site yesterday and she trailed off looking uncomfortable. And James prompted, I heard singing," she admitted quietly. "A lullaby, though I couldn't make out the words, and I felt like I was being watched the entire time, not by anything threatening, but by something sad, profoundly sad." James leaned back in his chair, studying his usually pragmatic assistant. Sarah was not given to flights of fancy or supernatural speculation. If she claimed to have experienced something unusual, it merited consideration. "Perhaps we should conduct a more thorough investigation of the site," James suggested. His academic curiosity piqued. "The juxtaposition of physical evidence with persistent local folklore often points to historical events that have been obscured or misinterpreted over time." Sarah nodded, visibly relieved that he wasn't dismissing her experience. "I've already requested permission for a more extensive excavation. The County Historical Society is surprisingly eager to cooperate. Apparently, they've been trying to understand the site's significance for years." "Excellent," James said, returning his attention to the dagger. "In the meantime, I'd like to learn more about this Elias Deringer. Even if official records are sparse, there might be mentions in personal correspondence, church registries, or business transactions from the period." "I'll see what I can find," Sarah promised, gathering her papers. As she turned to leave, a sudden gust of wind rattled the office window, causing both academics to start. Outside, storm clouds were gathering, unusually dark for early afternoon. "Looks like we're in for some weather," James observed. "You might want to head home before it hits." Sarah hesitated at the door. "Professor, there's one more thing. When I was at the site, I found this." She reached into her pocket and produced a small, tarnished locket. It was partially buried near where we found the dagger. James accepted the locket, turning it over in his hands. It was silver like the dagger and engraved with the same unusual tree-like symbol. With careful fingers, he pried it open to reveal two miniature portraits. A stern-faced man with deep-set eyes and a woman with a gentle expression and dark hair piled at the top of her head. No names, he noted, examining the interior for inscriptions. But the clothing and portraiture style are consistent with the late 18th century. This could indeed be Elias Deringer and his wife. That's what I thought. Sarah agreed. But when I showed it to one of the locals, an elderly woman who lives near the site, she had the strangest reaction. She said they're still waiting for him to come home and refused to touch it. James frowned, a chill running down his spine despite the Offic's warmth. Folklore often personifies historical figures, especially those associated with tragic or mysterious circumstances, he said, more to reassure himself than Sarah. It's a way for communities to process and transmit historical memory. Of course, Sarah nodded, though she didn't look entirely convinced. I'll let you know what I find about Deringer. After she left, James returned to his examination of the dagger, but found his thoughts continually drawn to the locket. The faces stared up at him with an unsettling intensity, as if trying to communicate across the centuries. Outside, the storm grew closer, thunder rumbling in the distance. 3 days later, James stood in the center of the excavation site, rain dripping from his hat brim despite the protective tarp overhead. The storm that had threatened on the day of his conversation with Sarah had never fully materialized, instead lingering over the region like a brooding presence, occasionally releasing short, violent downpours before subsiding into ominous silence. The expanded excavation had revealed the foundations of what had indeed been a substantial manor house, though only the east wing's foundation remained relatively intact. At its center was a room that, based on its dimensions and location, appeared to have been a nursery, an odd feature for a house built by a man who, according to Sarah's research, had died childless. Professor Hargrove called one of the graduate students assisting with the dig. "You need to see this." James made his way carefully across the muddy site to where the student knelt beside a section of exposed flooring in the nursery foundation. Unlike the stone used for the structural elements, this was wood remarkably well preserved given its age, as if protected from the elements by some unknown means. "We found it under a layer of more recent flooring," the student explained. "It appears to be original to the structure." James crouched for a closer look, immediately understanding the student's excitement. The wooden floor was marked with a large circle, still faintly visible after more than 2 centuries. Within the circle were symbols matching those on the dagger and locket, the strange tree-like pattern and other markings that defied easy categorization. "It appears to be some kind of ritual space," James murmured, tracing one of the symbols with a gloved finger. "Consistent with certain folk magic practices of the period, though the specific symbolism is unusual." "That's not all," the student said, pointing to the center of the circle. "Look at this." In the exact center of the circle was a dark stain, a deep red brown that had penetrated the wood so thoroughly that it remained visible despite the passage of time. James didn't need laboratory analysis to recognize it as blood. "Take samples," he instructed, "and photograph everything before we proceed. This could be significant." As the student moved to comply, Sarah approached, holding a folder and wearing an expression that suggested important news. "I found him," she said without preamble. "Elias Deringer, or rather, I found where he came from." James straightened. His interest peaked. "Go on." "He was born in London in 1750, the son of a moderately successful merchant," Sarah explained, opening the folder to reveal copies of various documents. "He came to America in 1775, apparently to establish a trading outpost for his father's company. What's interesting is that he seems to have disappeared for nearly a decade. From 1778 to 1787, there's no record of his whereabouts or activities. The Revolutionary War would have disrupted many records," James noted. "True, but this is different," Sarah insisted. "It's as if he deliberately dropped out of sight. When he reappears in 1787, he purchases this land and begins construction on the manor. He also marries a woman named Elias Blackwood, daughter of a Philadelphia physician." "The woman from the locket," James. "Miss Ed, most likely," Sarah agreed. "Here's where it gets strange. According to a letter I found in the Blackwood family archives, Isaiah and Elias were desperate to have children. Elias's father mentions consulting with specialists and trying various treatments, all without success. Not unusual for the time, James observed. Infertility was poorly understood and effective treatments were virtually non-existent. "Yes, but listen to this," Sarah said, extracting a fragile yellowed letter from the folder. "This is from Elias to her sister, dated March 1788. Isaiah has returned from his journey with renewed hope. He speaks of a solution he has discovered, one that defies conventional understanding, but which he swears will grant us the child we so desperately desire. I confess I am frightened by the change in him. There is a fervor in his eyes that borders on madness, and he spends hours locked in his study with a book he will not allow me to see. He has begun construction on a nursery in the East Wing, though there is no child to occupy it. When I expressed concern, he assured me that by winter we would have our son. The certainty with which he speaks chills me to the bone. James frowned, a sense of unease settling over him. And what happened? Did they have a child? Sarah shook her head. That's the last letter from Alina in the family archives. According to county death records, Elias Deringer died in November 1788, less than a year after purchasing the property. The cause of death is listed simply as misadventure. There's no record of Alina's fate, nor any indication that they ever had a child. Thunder rumbled overhead closer now, and the rain intensified, drumming against the protective tarp. From the woods surrounding the excavation site came a sound that might have been the wind through the trees, or might have been singing, a soft lullaby just at the edge of hearing. Professor called another student. This one working near what would have been the manor's entrance. "We've found something else." James and Sarah made their way to the new discovery, a large stone that appeared to have been part of the manor's foundation, now unearthed and cleaned of centuries of dirt. Carved into its surface was an inscription Elias Deringer 1750-1788. What price legacy? Below this formal epitaph, carved in a different, less practiced hand, were additional words, and his wife Alina and their son Thomas. "And all who came after may they find in death the peace denied them in life." "But you said they never had a child," James said, turning to Sarah with a puzzled frown. "According to all official records, they didn't," she confirmed. "There's no birth certificate, no baptismal record, nothing to suggest the existence of a Thomas Deringer. Yet someone believed he existed," James mused, studying the inscription. Someone who felt he deserved commemoration alongside his parents. The wind picked up suddenly, whipping the tarp and sending a shower of raindrops onto the exposed stone. One of the graduate students gasped, pointing at the ground near the foundation stone. "Look," she exclaimed. "Footprints." Sure enough, a set of small footprints had appeared in the mud, child-sized impressions that led from the stone toward the nursery foundation. But what caused James's breath to catch was the impossibility of their appearance. The ground had been covered with a tarp. The rain had not touched it, and no child had been present at the excavation site. Yet there they were, perfect footprints appearing one after another as if an invisible child were walking slowly, deliberately toward the nursery. "Everyone back to the vehicles," James ordered, his academic skepticism wearing with a primal instinct for self-preservation. "We're suspending work until the weather improves." No one argued. As the storm intensified, James's team packed up, but he lingered, watching the invisible footprints continue to form. At the edge of the woods, he saw a small figure, a child in clothing from another century. As James approached, he realized he could see through the figure. Its eyes were ancient and sorrowful. "I am what remains when everything else is taken," it said, its voice seeming to come from everywhere. "I am the echo of what never was." A flash of lightning, and the child was gone. That night, James dreamed. The Deringer manor stood whole and magnificent, and a woman who introduced herself as Elias Deringer greeted him at the door. She explained that dreams were doorways and led him to the nursery, which was now perfectly restored. On the far wall, he saw the list of Deringer children's names, written in blood, ending with the final entry, Elias Deringer, 1850-1880. James was confused, as historical records showed Elias Deringer died childless. History was rewritten, Alina explained, or rather unmade. She told him what he was seeing was the echo of a bloodline that no longer existed, thanks to the sacrifice of Elias, the last of the lined. She pointed to a leather-bound book, the grimoire Elias had found during his missing years in his desperate search for an heir. He made a bargain with an ancient entity that feeds on potential and unrealized dreams, offering it one child from each generation in exchange for fertility and an unbroken lineage. James struggled to comprehend how the Deringer line could be erased from history, yet he was witnessing its remnants. Alina explained that Elias discovered his ancestors' horrifying bargain and found a ritual to undo it all. By offering himself completely, not just his life, but his very existence, he rewrote history. The ritual worked. Elias died childless in 1788, the manor was never completed, and the entity, the hunger, was banished. "Then how are we having this conversation?" James asked. Alina explained that dreams were doorways and that some echoes persist. The land itself remembers the blood, the pain, and the sacrifice. She told him he was being contacted because he had found the dagger Elias used, a tool that existed outside the rewritten history as it was the instrument of that rewriting. Bringing it back to the site had strengthened the echoes. Looking out the nursery window, James saw a man he somehow knew was Elias, lingering in the garden below. "You must return the dagger to the circle," Elena urged, her form growing translucent. "Bury it where it was meant to rest. Only then will the echoes fade." She warned that if he didn't, the doorway between worlds might begin to open again. While not enough for the hunger to return, it would be enough for the echoes of the Deringer tragedy to grow stronger and repeat endlessly. "Free us, Professor," she pleaded as she vanished. "Let us fade completely." James woke with a start. The storm still raged outside. On his bedside table lay the silver dagger, though he was certain he had locked it in his office. Beside it was the locket, open to reveal the portraits of Isaiah and Elena. Staring at them, he now saw something he'd missed. Reflected in the glass over Isaiah's face was the faint image of a child, and in Elena's, a young man with a thin scar on his face, the echoes of what never was. The next morning, James returned alone to the Deringer property, the dagger in hand. The storm had finally broken, leaving behind a landscape washed clean, the ruins of the Mana foundation glistening in the early sunlight. The excavation equipment stood abandoned, the team having agreed to a day's break after the strange events of the previous afternoon. James made his way directly to the nursery foundation, the silver dagger heavy in his pocket. The ritual circle was still visible in the preserved wood, the symbols clear in the morning light. At its center, the blood stain remained, the physical evidence of a sacrifice that, if his dream was to be believed, had unmade an entire family line. Kneeling at the edge of the circle, James removed the dagger and the locket. After a moment's hesitation, he placed both at the center, directly over the blood stain. "I don't know if you can hear me," he said aloud, feeling slightly foolish but compelled to speak nonetheless. "I don't know if any of what I experienced was real or just an elaborate construction of my subconscious. But if you're there, Elias, Elena, all of you, I'm doing as you asked. I'm returning what was found, letting the echoes fade." As he spoke, a breeze stirred across the excavation site, unusual given the stillness of the morning. It carried with it the faint sound of a music box playing a lullaby, and for a moment James thought he saw them, translucent figures standing among the ruins. A woman in a burgundy dress, a stern-faced man, and dozens of children of various ages, all with the same deep-set eyes and solemn expressions. At their center stood a man in his 30s, with prematurely graying hair and a thin scar on his face, his expression one of profound peace. The figures raised their hands in a gesture that might have been farewell or gratitude. Then, like mist under a strengthening sun, they began to fade, growing fainter until they disappeared completely. The music box melody faded with them, leaving only the natural sounds of the morning. Birds' song, the rustle of leaves, the distant murmur of a stream. James remained kneeling for several minutes, absorbing what he had witnessed. When he finally looked down at the center of the circle, the dagger and locket were gone. Not removed or stolen, but simply gone, as if they had never been there at all. In their place was a single white flower, a type James didn't recognize, with petals that seemed to shimmer slightly in the sunlight. As he watched, the flower slowly withered and dissolved into dust, which the breeze carried away across the ruins of what had once been Deringer Manor. The echoes had faded. The story that never happened had finally found its ending. And as James rose to his feet, he felt a profound sense of completion. As if he had been part of something much larger than himself, something that spanned centuries and transcended the boundaries of conventional reality. He would continue the excavation, document the site, publish his findings, but he knew that the most significant aspect of the Deringer property would remain forever undocumented, the echo of a bloodline that had sacrificed everything to undo a terrible mistake to close a door that should never have been opened. As he walked back to his car, James glanced one last time at the ruins of the East Wing. For an instant he thought he saw a child standing among the foundations, a small boy with deep-set eyes and a solemn expression. The child raised his hand in farewell, then turned and walked away, fading into the morning mist until he was gone completely. "Not gone," James corrected himself. "Never there to begin with, an echo of what never was."